The movie starts with a woman lying on a bed with a rotting corpse. She wakes up, checks herself in the mirror, and notices a wound on her stomach by her victim. She cuts the corpse into small pieces and convinces herself that she killed the victim for her own survival. After burning the body in a secluded place and burying the ashes, the woman feels sick of this repetitive behavior and loneliness. The shapeshifter woman sits at a cafe table, familiarizing herself with her new identity, Emily. The shapeshifter takes the appearance as well as all the memories of their victims. So Emily walks into her house, smokes cigarettes and plays jazz music when her boyfriend, James, enters. He scolds Emily for disappearing for 3 days without any information. When Emily doesn't reply, he calls the police to inform them about her arrival. But Emily tries to prevent him from contacting the cops and stabs him with a corkscrew. She carefully puts James' dead body in a bag, cleans blood from the floor, and washes herself to remove any evidence. Soon, Emily realizes that her body has started to rot, and she feels worried as her new body shouldn't rot so quickly. Emily acknowledges that she needs a whole body, or she will die within 6 hours. When she has enough time to plan, Emily chooses her target carefully. But in emergencies, she orders food and attacks the delivery guys. Suddenly, the doorbell rings, and Emily feels surprised to find Detective Ranson. He asks for James to interrogate him about Emily's disappearance, so Emily invites him in. When the detective starts questioning Emily about her whereabouts, she cleverly dodges his question and offers him coffee. Emily starts talking to Ranson and suddenly holds his hand menacingly. Ranson cries in pain and clenches his fists as his body starts to deform. Later, the shapeshifter transforms into Ranson, and wears his clothes. The shapeshifter picks Ranson's rotten body from the couch, and mercilessly smashes his jaw with a hammer, to remove the teeth. The shapeshifter then puts gasoline all over the house and tries to flee, when the food delivery guy approaches. The shapeshifter runs away as the delivery guy shouts that his house is on fire. During his escape journey, the shapeshifter recalls a method to slow down the body's decay with painkillers and antibiotics. Noticing that he can't use Ranson's body, he decides to speed up the process of decaying by using drugs. The shapeshifter drives to a local bar and greets a dog happily. He then approaches a woman named Julia and orders her favorite drink. They laugh, have a good time, and begin to make out in the alley. Suddenly the shapeshifter feels sharp pain in his limbs and shouts at Julia to leave. The shapeshifter recounts how he was immune to injuries from previous bodies until now. He soon reaches his car and notices his body rotting. Realizing he doesn't have much time, the shapeshifter moves to the next car, where he spots a couple. He shows his detective card, orders the girl to leave, and sits in the driver's seat. The man inside the car, named Sam, begs the shapeshifter to spare his life. But the shapeshifter kills Sam and claims his body. He disposes of the rotten body in a secret place and arrives at his victim's house. Shapeshifter realizes that the victim lived in a family house and wishes to have a simple, uncomplicated life like him. The shapeshifter, now identified as Sam, meets his family and realizes Sam has a bad relationship with his wife. He sleeps in his bedroom without talking to his wife and yells at his daughter in the morning. At work, he meets his secretary Rachel and gets a flashback that Sam wanted to have an affair with her, but she refused. Later, Shapeshifter treats his patients but soon gets bored of his routine. While enjoying his lunch one day, the shapeshifter notices his crush outside, and asks a cab driver to follow her. The cab driver denies his request, and the shapeshifter feels sad that he has been unable to find the new address of Julia for a year. The shapeshifter then watches a movie in the theater, and feels happy that it helps him escape his thoughts. The shapeshifter feels guilty during dinner with Sam's family and leaves. He reaches a bar while holding a marble in his hands. The marble is a memory from his real family and gives him peace. Suddenly, Julia arrives and mentions watching him with a young girl the previous night. The shapeshifter accepts his mistake and promises never to cheat on his wife again. They both talk about how they felt like escaping from their family, but realize the importance of family now. Julia informs the shapeshifter that she once had a loving family, but lost everything after her son's death. Julia and her husband started to have problems, but one day, her husband Richard tried to mend their relationship. He set out a romantic dinner for them, and they had a good time, but he left her that night. Later, the shapeshifter uses the bathroom, notices a rot on his neck, and leaves the bar. He rents a motel room and sleeps, but wakes up in the middle of the night, because his rot is starting to spread on his whole body. In desperation, the shapeshifter calls Rachel and claims that he had a fight with his wife, and needs a friend. When Rachel reaches the motel room, it's all dark inside. Suddenly, shapeshifter takes over her body and revives. Meanwhile, the shapeshifter, who has transformed into Rachel, disposes of her body in a faraway place. However, when she hides the charred bones inside the farmhouse, a lady spots Rachel, who runs away. Later, the shapeshifter arrives at Rachel's house and feels relieved that her boyfriend is not home. She packs her belongings, takes a hefty dose of antibiotics, and dresses in a bold skirt. The shapeshifter arrives at the same bar and greets Julia, and they start a conversation. Julia notices that the shapeshifter has sad eyes, so she gives Rachel her contact card, in case she needs someone to talk to. Suddenly, a man approaches Rachel, and Julia excuses herself. Rachel feels jealousy when Julia starts talking to a handsome man named Robert. Julia keeps ignoring the man's flirting attempts as she watches the news on TV. The news indicates that Rachel has been reported as a suspect in a murder case. Rachel makes a plan, and seduces the man to use his body as her next target. They make out, but the man acts aggressively towards Rachel, so she attacks him angrily. The shapeshifter attacks the man with a knife, a bottle, and finally a lamp, causing him to run for his life, but she follows and kills him. A neighbor finds the dead body and informs the police, while the shapeshifter changes clothes and leaves. She runs away from the police, who follow her, but hides in an empty garage. She spends the night there and, in the morning, notices her hand rotting away. Suddenly, Tommy arrives there, but the shapeshifter knocks him down and escapes. Later, the shapeshifter feels intense pain and suspects that she is running out of time. She decides to tell Julia the truth and arrives at her office. However, the shapeshifter notices Julia on a date with Robert and gets jealous. She follows them, and pus starts seeping out from her rotting arm. As Julia and Robert leave the restaurant, the shapeshifter follows Robert. He pretends to be a delivery person to gain access inside the house. The shapeshifter then transforms into Robert and calls Julia. He confesses his feelings to her and asks her on another date. Julia agrees, and they plan to meet at her house. Shapeshifter watches Julia happily as she puts on her favorite music, and they chat happily. They talk about a similar connection between them and start to make out. The shapeshifter spends the night with Julia and makes breakfast for her in the morning. The next day, he goes back to his apartment to deal with the real Robert, and disposes of his dead body in a dam. They spend the next few days happily, but this happiness vanishes soon. One evening, Julia watches the news about several dead bodies found in a farmhouse. Later, when they are about to go on a date, the shapeshifter notices his body has started to rot again. He panics and vomits in the bathroom, while Julia feels worried for him. Shapeshifter finally decides to tell her the truth about his identity. Shapeshifter narrates that he killed his mother when he was just a child, but when he killed her, he felt her real love. He further confesses that he takes people's lives and becomes someone else. Julia doesn't understand any of this and decides to leave. However, the shapeshifter keeps trying to stop her and wants to complete his confession. He informs Julia that he has known and loved her longer than she knows. He first felt love for her when he transformed into her late husband, indicating that a shapeshifter was with Julia that night her husband left. A desperate Julia asks for her husband's whereabouts, and the shapeshifter informs her that his dead body is among others at the farm. The shapeshifter assures Julia that he loves her and will never hurt her, but she wants to leave. When the shapeshifter prevents Julia from going, she hurts him with a taser and starts attacking him. He falls to the ground, and Julia keeps hitting him when suddenly, the change begins. The shapeshifter watches with mortification when he is transformed into Julia. He mourns as he watches the rotten body of his beloved woman. Shapeshifter then goes to the bar and thanks the bartender for caring for Julia over the years. He then accepts his fate and decides to let his body rot in Julia's apartment. But in the morning, his body becomes encapsulated inside a cocoon. He starts breaking out of the cocoon and emerges in his aged form. As the shapeshifter wanders the city as an older man, he feels the guilt and memories of his past. Finally, he sits on a park bench and accepts that he will never know about his true identity.